We are all beginning with the same preface. In the 10 minutes that I have to speak, I will try and condense a single point on the subject of Iran. Look, I think it's pretty clear the nature of the Iranian threat to this region. And General Amos Gilad laid out a good portion of this in terms of the number of countries that are affected by the Iranian threat. Anyone reviewing recent history in the last 10, 15 years will see that most of the major countries in the Middle East have been affected by the Iranian threat. Iraq today has to deal with Shiite militias that have been trained by the Iranians, sometimes with the help of Hezbollah, who speak Arabic for the Farsi-speaking Republican Guards, Revolutionary Guards. The Yemen conflict, Saudi Arabia, where we had the Khobar Towers attack in 1996, Bahrain, which has an enormous Shiite majority and has had repeated efforts that have been made with the support of Iran to overthrow the Sunni leader of that island state. Lebanon, of course, the ideal target of Iran since the days of 1982 and the rise of Hezbollah. Now the Gaza Strip, since Hamas has shifted to being under the Iranian wing, and of course other countries like Sudan and elsewhere. Now, we all are aware of the Iranian modus operandi, using subversion, terrorism, to spread Iranian influence across the region. Here's the question I don't think people are paying adequate attention to. What is the influence of a nuclear Iran on all this activity? Normally, when you hear about the threat of Iran crossing the nuclear threshold, one immediately thinks in terms of missiles, of nuclear-tipped missiles, first hitting the Middle East, then beginning to reach out to Europe, and of course, eventually, now that they have demonstrated a space lift capability, an intercontinental range that could hit the United States. But the most likely scenario that one has to take into consideration when one talks about a nuclear Iran is what happens to terrorism and subversion. Iran is the largest supporter of terrorism in the world today. So what happens to that capability when you put a nuclear umbrella over it? And I think the best way to consider that is to look back to 9/11. 9/11, the United States was attacked by Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was based in Afghanistan under the Taliban. To remind you, the Taliban did not have nuclear weapons. The Taliban did not have long-range missiles. And therefore, at the time of 9/11, the U.S. national security establishment could say, we are going to send a lesson to states that support terrorism. You attack the American homeland, we take down your regime. And that's precisely what happened. The United States went into Afghanistan, took down the Taliban regime. They ran for the hills. They're now back. But nonetheless, an important demonstration was made that if you support terrorism and terrorism strikes the American homeland, you know what? If it strikes also other NATO allies, there's a price to be paid, and a price in terms of losing your regime. Now, that was true for the year 2001. Let's fast forward to 2012, 2014. And let's consider, God forbid, but another terrorist attack of a similar type on the United States, on a NATO ally like the UK, Germany, or France, done by an organization like Hezbollah, which has the capability of doing the same thing that Al-Qaeda did, or by a Sunni organization like Al-Qaeda. You know that when the United States went into Afghanistan under the Taliban, Al-Qaeda's command split. Most of it went to Pakistan, but a good portion of it went into Iran and remained in Iran and ordered terrorist attacks from Iranian territory. So that the U.S. and its allies in 2012 or 2014 could face a threat of terrorism, of substantial terrorism, from either a Shiite or Sunni source based in Iran. Now, would the United States have the same freedom of action to respond to a terrorist threat of that level emanating from Iran the same way it responded to a terrorist threat that it absorbed on 9/11? That is in the future. Is that possible? What happens when an attack like that occurs and the U.S. has to consider its response, and now it's dealing with a nuclear power on the other side? I think the whole balance of power, the global balance of power, between the Islamist terrorism that we have seen and the West fundamentally changes. You know who's the best guest you could have had to answer this question, by the way? Had you had a senior figure from India who would have told you how India has to deal with terrorism coming out of Pakistan now that Pakistan has a nuclear umbrella. I'm sure you guys at BESA have heard some of this in your dialogue with the Indians. But that's precisely the problem. The whole balance of forces changes. And I'm not sure people fully have internalized what the nature of this problem is. Therefore, prevention of a nuclear Iran certainly isn't just the security of Israel that's involved. Prevention of a nuclear Iran isn't just the free flow of oil through the Straits of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf. Prevention of a nuclear Iran has implications for the overall war against radical Islamist terrorism. And because Iran has shown that it has the ability to provide support and sanctuary for both Shiite and Sunni groups, the effects of a nuclear Iran are huge. I know that we've been speaking about the question of Russia and Iran in recent days because of the visit of Prime Minister Netanyahu to Moscow. The question I would ask the Russians, who seem to have been very supportive of Iran over the last number of years, is what happens to the Sunni fundamentalist groups that are threatening them in the Caucasus, whether you're in Chechnya or Dagestan, when Iran has a nuclear umbrella. Won't they seek to also come under that umbrella in the future? Isn't a nuclear Iran going to undermine the interests of Russia and not just the West? So to close, I think this is a very important portion of the threat that a nuclear Iran poses that we have not adequately examined. It's tempting to summarize the Iranian threat by simply taking the ranges of missiles and putting them on a map and showing how the ranges are getting longer and longer. But it is the marriage of terrorism and nuclear capability that is the immediate threat the West will face if it doesn't live up to what it's saying, and that is preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Thank you.